The fluorescent lights buzzed like distant thunder in the sterile corridor of Mercy General Hospital, casting long shadows that danced across the linoleum floor. It was just past midnight, and the air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you'd left. In the emergency waiting room, a young mother clutched her toddler's hand, her face etched with exhaustion and fear. The child, no more than 5, whimpered softly, his small frame shivering under a thin blanket. He'd been brought in earlier that evening after a fall from the fire escape of their rundown apartment building, scratches and bruises marking his arms, but the real terror was in his eyes, wide and haunted, as if the world had already shown him too much cruelty. Nurses hurried by, clipboards in hand, their voices a murmur of urgency. The mother whispered reassurances, but her own voice cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. This wasn't just any night. It was the kind where hope felt like a fragile thread, ready to snap. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, blurring the neon sign that read, "Emergency," into a hazy glow. No one noticed the lone figure pulling up on a weathered Harley, its engine rumbling to a stop like a beast settling into sleep. The rider killed the ignition, the sudden silence amplifying the storm's whisper. He swung his leg over the bike, boots hitting the wet pavement with a solid thud, leather jacket scarred from years of road dust and close calls, jeans faded and patched, a bandana tied loosely around his neck. He looked every bit the outsider in this place of white coats and quiet efficiency. Ethan Ghost. Harlan stepped through the sliding doors, water dripping from his broad shoulders, shaking it off like a dog emerging from the rain. His face was weathered, lines carved deep from sun and sorrow, eyes hidden behind tinted sunglasses even in the dim light. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, picked from the roadside on his way, simple daisies, their petals bruised but defiant. He scanned the room, zeroing in on the mother and child, a flicker of recognition tightening his jaw. But before he could approach, a burly security guard stepped forward, arms crossed like a barricade. The guard's uniform was crisp, badge gleaming under the lights. His expression one of practiced disdain. "Hey, buddy," the guard barked, voice echoing off the walls. "This ain't a motel. You can't just waltz in here looking like that. Leather and mud? We got rules. Out." He jabbed a thumb toward the exit, ignoring the curious glances from other waiting families. Ethan's hand paused mid-stride, the flowers wilting slightly in his grip. He removed his sunglasses slowly, revealing steel-grey eyes that had seen too many dawns break over empty horizons. "I'm here to see someone," he said, voice low and gravelly, like tires on loose gravel. The guard snorted, stepping closer, the scent of his cheap cologne cutting through the hospital air. "Yeah, well, see him somewhere else. We don't need troublemakers stirring up the patients." The mother looked up then, her eyes narrowing in confusion as Ethan stood his ground. The toddler buried his face in her side, the whimper turning to a sob. Ethan's gaze softened for a split second, a shadow of memory crossing his features, flashes of smoke and screams, the roar of flames that still haunted his dreams. But the guard wasn't done. He grabbed Ethan's arm, fingers digging into the leather, propelling him toward the door. "I said out, or I'll call the cops." Rain lashed harder outside, the storm mirroring the tension building in the lobby. Ethan didn't resist, but as he was shoved past the threshold, the flowers slipped from his hand, scattering petals across the floor like fallen soldiers. That's when it happened. The power flickered, then died. Alarms blared from every corner, red emergency lights kicking in with a sinister pulse. Shouts erupted as the backup generators whirred to life, but not before chaos took hold. In the dim glow, the mother screamed. Her son had slipped from her grasp in the panic, toddling toward the suddenly dark corridor where nurses were scrambling. The guard spun, his bravado crumbling, fumbling for his radio. "What the? Everyone stay calm!" but calm was a luxury long gone. Shadows twisted in the emergency lighting, and the child's cries pierced the din, drawing every eye. Ethan didn't hesitate. He burst back through the doors, ignoring the guards' bellowed protests, his boots pounding the floor as he zeroed in on the boy. The corridor ahead was a maze of gurneys and curtained bays, now plunged into confusion. A loose wire from the flickering lights sparked nearby, the acrid smell of burning plastic rising. Ethan scooped the child up mid-stride, the boy's small arms wrapping around his neck instinctively, tears soaking the bandana. "Easy, kid," Ethan murmured, voice steady amid the storm. He navigated the debris, shielding the toddler from a falling ceiling tile that crashed down like thunder. Behind him, the guard radioed for help, but it was Ethan's calm that cut through the fear. He directed a nurse to the mother, then helped secure a loose door that threatened to swing wildly in the draft. As the light stabilized, the lobby exhaled collectively. The mother rushed forward, enveloping her son and Ethan in a tearful embrace. "Thank you," she gasped, her voice breaking. You saved him." Ethan's nod was brief, his eyes distant, as if the act was just muscle memory from a life built on forgotten oaths. The guard approached sheepishly now, face paling as whispers spread among the staff. One nurse, older with a knowing look, pulled him aside. "You don't know who that is, do you?" she said, her tone laced with reverence. 8 years ago, during that warehouse fire down by the docks, the one that could have taken the whole East Wing. It was him, Ghost Harlan. He rode in alone, pulled out half the night shift before the roof caved, saved everyone here, including me. The guard's mouth opened, then closed, the weight of his mistake settling like rain-soaked earth. Ethan straightened, brushing dirt from his jacket, the wildflowers forgotten on the floor. He hadn't come for recognition. He'd come because of a promise, one made in the ashes of that night to a dying friend, a vow to watch over the families left behind, to be the shadow that stepped in when the world turned blind. The mother met his gaze, understanding dawning. "You're the one from the stories," she whispered. Ethan tipped his head, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Just passing through," he replied, but his eyes said otherwise. In that moment, the hospital didn't feel so sterile. It pulsed with the quiet rhythm of second chances, the kind forged in fire and kept in silence. Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle, the Harley waiting like a loyal steed. But Ethan lingered, sensing the threads of fate tightening once more. The guard watched him go, a man humbled by the leather-clad savior he'd nearly cast away. As the engine roared to life, cutting through the night, it carried the echo of oaths unbroken, a rider's honor etched in scars and road dust, ready to ride into whatever storm lay ahead. The child's laughter, faint but real, trailed after him, a promise fulfilled in the unlikeliest of places. The rain had softened to a misty veil by the time Ethan eased the Harley onto the cracked asphalt of the hospital parking lot, the engine's low growl fading into the night's hush. Streetlights pooled orange glows on the wet pavement, reflecting off puddles like scattered memories. He paused at the edge of the lot, gloved hand resting on the throttle, his breath visible in the chill air. The wildflowers were gone, trampled underfoot in the chaos, but their scent lingered faintly on his jacket, a reminder of intentions purer than the storm that had brought him here. 8 years, that's how long it had been since the fire, since the acrid smoke clawed at his lungs and the screams of the trapped pulled him from the shadows. He'd kept his word to Marcus, the brother-in-arms who'd gasped it out in the rubble. "Watch over them, Ghost, the families, the ones we couldn't save in time." Marcus had slipped away before the sirens wailed, leaving Ethan with a patch from his old club vest and a vow heavier than any chain. He revved the engine once, the vibration rumbling through his bones, then pulled out onto the empty road. The city sprawled ahead, a labyrinth of flickering neon and shadowed alleys, the kind of place where secrets festered like open wounds. Mercy General faded in his mirrors, but the pull of unfinished business tugged at him. The mother, Lila, her name had come up in the nurse's hurried thanks, had pressed a crumpled note into his hand before he left. "If you ever need anything," she'd said, eyes shining with unspoken gratitude. But Ethan knew better. It was he who might need something from her world, the fragile thread connecting him to the life he'd buried under miles of blacktop. Miles blurred by, the Harley's headlight cutting through the fog like a determined eye. He headed toward the outskirts, where the Iron Oath clubhouse squatted like a weathered sentinel amid rusting shipping containers and overgrown lots. The club wasn't what it used to be, fractured by betrayals and the slow grind of time, but it was home, the chosen family that had stitched his scars with loyalty forged in fire. As he rolled up to the chain-link gate, a figure emerged from the gloom. Caleb, the club's enforcer, his massive frame silhouetted against the floodlights. Caleb's beard was streaked with grey, tattoos snaking up his arms like roads to forgotten battles. He nodded once, unlocking the gate with a metallic clank that echoed in the quiet. "Ghost," Caleb rumbled, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder as he dismounted. "Heard about the hospital. Word travels fast in these parts." His eyes, sharp despite the late hour, scanned Ethan's face for cracks in the armor. Inside the clubhouse, the air was thick with the aroma of aged leather and simmering stew from the communal pot. A few brothers lounged around the scarred wooden table, veterans like themselves, marked by the same ghosts. Noah, the quiet mechanic with fingers stained black from engine grease, slid a beer across the bar. "Saved a kid, huh? Sounds like old times." Ethan shrugged off his jacket, hanging it on a hook by the door, the leather creaking softly. He took the beer, the cold glass grounding him, and sank into a chair. Wasn't looking for it. Power outage. Kid wondered. But his voice carried the weight of more, the flicker of that old promise reigniting. The brothers leaned in, the room's dim bulbs casting warm halos on their faces, a circle of trust amid the world's indifference. Caleb pulled up a stool, his voice dropping low. That guard, he didn't know, but now the story's spreading. Nurses talking, families whispering. "You're a legend again, brother." Legends didn't keep Ethan up at night. Regrets did. He took a long pull from the bottle, the bitter foam chasing away the hospital's sterile chill. "It's not about me. Marcus's wife, Lila's connected somehow. Lost her boy in that fire or close enough. The note. She mentioned a debt." The words hung heavy, stirring murmurs around the table. Noah's brow furrowed, his calloused hands drumming a slow rhythm. "Debt? From back then? Thought we settled those scores." But Ethan shook his head, the bandana around his neck feeling tighter. The fire hadn't just taken lives. It had unraveled threads, leaving widows and orphans in its wake. Lila's child tonight. It was an echo, a call to honor the oath before it frayed completely. Outside, thunder grumbled in the distance, a warning of storms yet to break. Ethan stood, pacing to the window where the club's banners fluttered in the breeze. Iron Oath, embroidered with a fist clutching a broken chain, symbol of bonds unbreakable. He'd walked away from the club after Marcus, riding solo for years, chasing redemption on endless highways. But tonight, the pull was stronger. "There's more to it," he said finally, turning to face them. "Corruption in that hospital, whispers from the staff, supplies vanishing, corners cut. The fire, it was no accident. Faulty wiring they ignored to save a buck." Caleb's eyes hardened, fists clenching. "You saying someone's playing God with lives again?" The room tensed, the air electric with shared history. Ethan nodded, pulling the crumpled note from his pocket. Lila's handwriting was neat, urgent. "They came for my husband's records tonight. Please, if you're the one from the stories, help us bury the truth before it buries us. Records from the fire, Proof of negligence, perhaps, buried under layers of institutional lies. The guard's expulsion earlier, a symptom of a deeper rot, where appearances trumped honor and saviors were discarded like yesterday's trash. "We ride at dawn," Ethan declared, his voice steady as the road. "Not for glory, for the promise." The brothers rose as one, a silent pact sealing the air. Noah clapped his back, the gesture warm against the chill doubt. Caleb grinned faintly, the first crack in his stoic facade. Family first, Ghost. Always. As the night deepened, they planned in hushed tones, scouting routes, calling in favors from old allies. A nurse who'd owed her life to Ethan, a veteran cop turning blind eyes to the club's quiet justice. The clubhouse pulsed with purpose, the scent of coffee brewing now mingling with resolve. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, lighting a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the scars on his knuckles. The city lights twinkled mockingly, but he saw only the path ahead, a moral reckoning where loyalty would clash against corruption and one man's word could topple empires built on deceit. Dawn crept in slowly, painting the horizon in bruised purples. Ethan mounted his bike, the engine awakening with a throaty roar that scattered the morning mist. Behind him 20 riders formed up, Caleb at his flank, Noah bringing up the rear, their leathers gleaming like armor in the first light. They weren't storming gates, this was precision, a shadow operation to unearth truths long buried. As they rolled out, the wind whipping through their ranks, Ethan felt the weight lift slightly. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was the ride itself, fueled by oaths that outlasted flames and forgot no one. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The first rays of dawn slice through the morning fog like hesitant blades, turning the dew-kissed asphalt into a mosaic of silver and shadow. Ethan's Harley led the convoy, its chrome accents catching the light as the engine's steady thrum harmonized with the chorus of 20 bikes trailing behind. The air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of wet earth and exhaust, a scent that grounded him in the moment. Caleb rode close on his left, a black and silver beast of a machine purring under him, while Noah flanked the right, his customized chopper rumbling with the precision of a well-tuned heart. They moved as one, a phalanx of leather and resolve cutting through the waking city, headlights piercing the veil like eyes unblinking. The outskirts gave way to the urban sprawl, buildings rising like jagged teeth against the paling sky. Ethan kept his gaze forward, the wind tugging at his bandana, but his mind replayed Lila's note, the scrawled words, a beacon in the dim corners of his thoughts. They came for the records tonight. Who were they? Hospital brass covering tracks from the fire, or something deeper? A syndicate preying on the vulnerable, the same rot that had let faulty wiring claim Marcus and so many others. The promise to his fallen brother wasn't just about protection, it was about excavation, digging up truths buried under layers of indifference and greed. As the convoy crested a hill, Mercy General came into view below, its white facade glowing softly in the dawn. A sanctuary turned suspect. They pulled into the employee lot at the rear, engines cutting off in a cascading silence that amplified the distant hum of early traffic. Ethan dismounted first, boots crunching on gravel, and scanned the area. Delivery vans idling, a few staff slipping in through side doors, coffee cups steaming in their hands. No overt threats, but the air felt charged, like the hush before a lightning strike. Caleb joined him, rolling his shoulders to shake off the ride's stiffness. Quiet for now. We split up, eyes everywhere. Noah nodded, already pulling a worn toolkit from his saddlebag, the kind that could jimble locks or splice wires without a trace. I'll take the basement. Records are down there, if the whispers hold. Ethan led the way to a service entrance, the group's presence drawing wary glances from a janitor pushing a mop bucket. The man paused, eyes widening at the bikers' silhouettes, tattoos peeking from collars, patches on vests declaring iron oath. But Ethan raised a hand in peace, his voice low. "Just here to tie up loose ends. No trouble." The janitor hesitated, then shrugged. The weight of his own unspoken burdens evident in the slump of his shoulders. He'd seen enough shadows in these halls to know not all monsters wore white coats. The door clicked open, and they filed in, the cool rush of conditioned air greeting them like a reluctant host. Inside, the corridors were a labyrinth of beige walls and humming fluorescence, the scent of bleach sharp enough to sting. Ethan moved with purpose, his steps measured, ears attuned to the subtle creaks of the building settling. They split at the first junction, Caleb toward the admin offices on the second floor, where files might hide in digital vaults, Noah vanishing down a stairwell to the archives. Ethan headed for the East Wing, where the fire had started 8 years prior, a storage room now repurposed. But echoes lingered in the singed framework, visible through patched drywall. His gloved hand trailed the wall, feeling the faint ridges of old scars, much like his own. A door at the end of the hall stood ajar, light spilling from within. Voices drifted out, 2 men, tones clipped and urgent. Ethan pressed against the frame, shadow blending with shadow. "The audit's coming," one said, voice oily with strain. "If those old manifests surface, the wiring bids we fudged, it'll unravel everything. Get rid of them tonight." The other grunted, papers rustling. "Already handled the night crew, but that biker stirring things up, security's on alert if he digs." The first voice cut him off with a hiss. "Then we bury him too. Debts from the fire stay dead." Ethan's jaw tightened, the words igniting a slow burn in his chest. Not just negligence, deliberate sabotage, lives traded for profit. Marcus's face flashed in his mind, pale and resolute in the smoke, his last breath sealing the oath. Ethan slipped away before they emerged, heart pounding a rhythm of restrained fury. He rendezvoused with Noah in the basement, where the air grew musty, shelves groaning under boxes labeled in faded ink. Noah was elbow-deep in a locked cabinet, his flashlight beam dancing like a firefly. "Got something," he whispered, pulling a yellowed folder free. Manifests indeed, bids from a shell company, signatures linking to hospital board members. Proof of cut corners, ignored warnings that had turned a spark into an inferno. But as Noah tucked the documents into his vest, footsteps echoed from the stairs, heavy, purposeful. Security, alerted by some unseen tripwire. Ethan signaled retreat, the two of them melting into the dimness, hearts sinking to the club's unspoken code. Strike true, vanish clean. They burst into the morning light through a loading dock, the sun now fully risen, bathing the lot in gold. Caleb was waiting, a flash drive in hand from the admin hack, digital trails mirroring the paper ones. "It's bigger than we thought," he said, mounting up. "Ties to city contracts, they're bleeding the place dry." The convoy reformed, engines igniting in a defiant roar that turned heads from the main entrance. Nurses paused mid-shift, smiles breaking through fatigue as they recognized the rider from the night before. Lila stood at a window, the toddler waving from her arms. A silent thank you carried on the breeze. Ethan nodded once, the weight of the folder in his saddlebag, a talisman against the gathering storm. They rode out not as invaders, but as guardians, oaths pulling them toward confrontation, where loyalty would face the blade of corruption head-on. Back at the clubhouse, the midday sun filtered through grimy windows, casting patterns on the table strewn with the pilfered evidence. The brothers gathered, faces grim but united, the air thick with the aroma of fresh-brewed coffee and unyielding purpose. Ethan spread the manifests, fingers tracing the damning lines. "This ends now. We expose it, not with fists, but with truth, for Marcus, for the ones we couldn't reach." Caleb leaned in, eyes fierce. "And the families? Lila's one of many. We protect them all. Noah nodded, sealing the pact with a raised mug. The room hummed with quiet resolve, the iron oath binding them tighter than any chain. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering of trials ahead. Ethan stepped onto the porch, lighting another cigarette, the smoke curling like unanswered questions. Redemption rode on the edge of exposure, a promise demanding its due. The city waited, oblivious to the reckoning brewing in the shadows of forgotten fires. The afternoon sun hung low over the clubhouse, its golden rays slanting through the chain-link fence like fingers probing secrets. Ethan crushed the cigarette under his boot, the ember hissing out against the weathered wood of the porch. Inside, the brothers pored over the evidence, voices a low murmur punctuated by the scratch of pens on paper and the clink of mugs. The manifests lay splayed like a battlefield map, signatures linking hospital admins to shadowy contractors who'd pocketed funds meant for safety upgrades. Faulty wiring wasn't negligence. It was a calculated risk, lives bartered for bottom lines. Ethan's gaze drifted to the Iron Oath banner on the wall, its threads frayed but unyielding, a mirror to the bonds holding them together. Caleb broke the silence first, his massive hands folding a printout with deliberate care. "We can't just hand this to the cops. Half of them are in the pockets of these suits. Remember the raid 2 years back? Our own evidence vanished overnight." Noah nodded, wiping grease from his fingers on a rag, his eyes sharp behind the perpetual squint of a man who'd fixed more than machines. "Anonymous drop, local press. They've got a reporter, Elena, owes me for patching a ride after that hit and run. She digs deep, no fear." "Read." The room weighed the options, the air thick with the scent of ink and resolve, each man carrying his own ghosts from battles past. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, the cool metal grounding him. This wasn't vengeance, it was justice, the kind that honored Marcus by pulling light into the dark corners where corruption thrived. As dusk crept in, painting the sky in strokes of crimson and indigo, they mobilized. Ethan mounted his Harley, the engine awakening with a throaty pulse that vibrated through his core. The convoy, now swelled to 15 with calls to trusted allies, rolled out under the cover of twilight. Headlights off until the city swallowed them. They split into pairs, Noah and Elena meeting at a dimly lit diner on the edge of town. The folder passed under the table, amid the sizzle of fries and the hum of fluorescent tubes. Caleb handled the digital side, slipping the flash drive to a hacker friend in a back-alley cybercafe, screens flickering like distant stars as firewalls crumbled silently. Ethan rode solo toward the hospital's underbelly, drawn by Lila's note and the pull of unfinished oaths. The service roads wound through industrial lots, shadows lengthening as night fully claimed the horizon. Ethan's headlight carved a path through the gloom, the wind carrying whispers of rain on the breeze. He parked a block from Mercy General, the building's lights a beacon against the encroaching dark, its facade hiding fractures like a cracked eggshell. Slipping through a chain-link gap he'd noted earlier, he moved like a spectre, boots silent on dew-slick grass. The east wing loomed where the fire had raged, a place of memorials unspoken, walls bearing faint scorch marks like tattoos of survival. He needed confirmation, one last piece to seal the exposure, witness statements from that night, buried deeper than records. A side door yielded to his toolkit, the lock clicking open with a soft snick that echoed in his ears. Inside, the corridors were hushed, the night shift's footsteps distant echoes. Ethan navigated by memory, the scent of polished floors mingling with faint traces of smoke that never fully aired out. He reached the old storage room, now a utility closet, its door sealed with a padlock that gave way under Noah's borrowed picks. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light from his penlight, illuminating shelves of forgotten files. There, a locked box, initials scratched into the lid. M.H. Marcus Harlan. Heart pounding, Ethan pried it open, fingers brushing yellowed pages, journals, sketches of the warehouse layout, notes on ignored complaints. Marcus had suspected the rot even then, piecing together the puzzle before the flames consumed him. But as he tucked the box under his arm, a shadow shifted in the hallway. Footsteps. Quick, deliberate. Ethan doused the light, pressing into the corner, breath shallow. The door creaked wider and a figure entered, not security, but a woman in scrubs, her face pale under the harsh bulb. Lila. She froze, eyes widening in recognition, then relief. "Ghost," she whispered, voice trembling like leaves in wind. "I saw your bike, knew you'd come." She'd followed him, driven by the same desperation that had penned her note. In hurried tones, she spilled what the records couldn't. Her husband's role as a maintenance whistleblower, silenced by threats before the fire. They knew, the board. They rigged the bids to line their pockets. Marcus found out, and they made sure he wouldn't talk. Ethan's grip tightened on the box, the weight of her words settling like lead. This was no abstract corruption. It was personal, a blade twisted in old wounds. "Why now?" he asked, voice gravel low. Lila's eyes glistened, the corridor's chill raising gooseflesh on her arms. "The audit. They're covering tracks again, falsifying new reports. If it breaks, families like mine get nothing, no justice, no closure." A distant alarm beeped. Routine check, but it spurred them. They slipped out together, the night air a balm against the confined tension, Lila's hand brushing his arm in silent alliance. Back on the Harley, her clinging to him as they rode into the dark, Ethan felt the family's circle widen, chosen bonds forging stronger in the face of deceit. By midnight, the pieces converged at the clubhouse. Elena arrived first, her notebook filled with questions turned revelations, the reporter's fire matching the biker's quiet fury. "This hits the morning edition," she promised, the diner's coffee still staining her cup. Caleb's hacker confirmed the digital trails. Emails, transfers, a web of greed spanning City Hall. The brothers assembled around the table, the box open like a Pandora's gift of truth. Noah traced a line on the manifest. "We leak it all. No names on us, just the facts." Ethan nodded, the room's lamplight casting heroic shadows on their faces. But doubt flickered in his eyes. Exposure meant risks, to Lila, to the club, to the fragile peace they'd carved from ashes. As the clock ticked toward dawn, Ethan stepped outside again, the stars a canopy over the restless night. Lila waited by the fence, her toddler asleep in a borrowed truck, a picture of vulnerability that steeled his resolve. "You kept your promise," she said softly, the words a bridge across years. He met her gaze, the bandana loose around his neck. "We all did, for Marcus." The wind carried the faint rumble of approaching bikes. More allies, drawn by the oath's call. Corruption's empire teetered, but the real battle loomed. Not in shadows, but in the light of day, where honor would demand its reckoning. Redemption wasn't won in silence. It roared like engines on an open road, pulling the lost into its fold. If this chapter's grit and heart are stirring something in you, please hit that like button. It helps these stories reach more riders on the road. The first light of dawn bled across the horizon, turning the clubhouse's gravel lot into a canvas of muted greys and golds. Ethan stood at the fence's edge, the cool metal pressing into his palms like an anchor against the tide of what was coming. Lila's truck idled nearby, its engine a soft purr that mirrored the quiet tension in the air, her toddler's face pressed against the window in innocent sleep. The scent of dew clung to the earth, mingling with the faint exhaust from the arriving bikes, more brothers from outlying chapters. Their silhouettes emerging from the mist like ghosts summoned by oath. Caleb clapped Ethan on the back, his grip firm, a silent vow exchanged in the space between words. "Sun's up. Time to ride the truth home." They mounted as one, the convoy swelling to 30 strong. engines igniting in a staggered roar that shattered the morning's hush. Harleys and choppers lined up like soldiers at attention. Chrome gleaming under the rising sun, patches of the iron oath fluttering in the breeze, a fist breaking chains, symbol of fractures mended by will alone. Ethan led, Lila's truck trailing at a safe distance, her presence a tether to the human cost of their quest. The road unfurled before them, winding toward the city's heart where Mercy General stood as both witness and culprit. No guns, no threats. This was a procession of accountability, leathers worn like badges of honor against the suits that hid deceit. The city stirred awake as they rolled in, coffee shops spilling aromas of fresh brews and the distant clang of construction echoing off high-rises. Pedestrians paused on sidewalks, phones lifting to capture the thunder of tires on pavement, whispers rippling like aftershocks. Ethan kept his visor down, eyes scanning the flanks for shadows that might turn hostile. The corruption they'd unearthed wasn't isolated. The manifests tied hospital funds to city officials, a web spun from greed that ensnared the vulnerable, families like Lila's, left to pick up pieces from fires both literal and figurative. Marcus's journal weighed heavy in his saddlebag, its pages a testament to one man's quiet stand, now amplified by the Brotherhood's unyielding loyalty. Mercy General's parking lot filled quickly, bikes forming a respectful perimeter away from the main entrance, engines dying to a collective sigh. Staff emerged in clusters, scrubs crisp under the morning sun, their faces a mix of curiosity and wariness. The guard from the night before hovered at the doors, his uniform rumpled, eyes darting as if expecting ghosts to materialize. Ethan dismounted first, boots hitting the asphalt with a resonant thud, the group fanning out behind him like a shield wall. Lila joined him, her hand finding his arm, the toddler now awake and clinging to her leg, wide eyes taking in the sea of leather with unfiltered wonder. The hospital director, a slick man named Harlan, coincidence or cruel irony, stepped out flanked by two suits, their briefcases clutched like talismans. His face was all polished smiles, but the tick in his jaw betrayed the fracture beneath. "This is private property," he announced, voice amplified by a microphone from a hastily called press conference setup. Reporters milled nearby, Elena among them, her notebook poised like a weapon. "Whatever grievance brings you here, we can discuss it inside. Civilly." But Ethan's stance was unyielding, the wind tugging at his bandana as he pulled the folder from his vest, holding it aloft like a banner. "No more closed doors," Ethan said, his gravel voice carrying clear over the murmurs. 8 years ago, this place burned because corners were cut, wiring bids rigged, warnings ignored, lives lost, including my brother's. We have the proof. Gasps rippled through the crowd, cameras flashing like lightning. Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My husband was maintenance." He spoke up, and they silenced him. "These records, they're the truth you buried." The director's composure cracked, his eyes flicking to the folder as Caleb and Noah flanked Ethan, their presence a wall of quiet menace, not violent, but immovable. Security shifted uneasily, the guard from before averting his gaze, shame etching lines on his face. Whispers from the staff grew bolder, nurses nodding, a doctor murmuring agreement, the rot exposed in fragments they'd long suspected, but the suits pushed back, one barking into a phone, summoning reinforcements, city cops with badges that might bend to favors. Tension coiled like a spring, the air thick with the scent of hot asphalt and anticipation. Ethan felt the pull of doubt, a whisper in his mind. Was this justice, or just another storm, inviting chaos? Marcus's oath echoed, protect the families, honor the fallen, not through destruction, but by dragging shadows into light. A patrol car screeched into the lot, lights flashing but sirens silent, 2 officers stepping out with hands on holsters. The lead cop, a veteran with salt and pepper hair, eyed the bikers warily before locking onto Ethan. Recognition dawned slowly, a nod exchanged that spoke of shared roads and unspoken pacts. "Heard the call," the cop said, voice low. "But if you've got evidence, it's not our fight. Yet." He turned to the director, the weight of the moment pressing down. Elena seized the opening, her questions firing like rounds. "Care to comment on the falsified bids, the whistleblower's death?" The director stammered, sweat beading on his brow, the facade crumbling under the sun's unforgiving glare. As the crowd swelled, families from the fire arriving, drawn by the buzz on social feeds, the convoy stood firm, a chosen family woven from scars and promises. Ethan handed the folder to Eleanor, the transfer a ritual of release, truths now free to ignite their own reckoning. Lila squeezed his hand, her toddler reaching out to touch his knee, a small gesture that bridged the years of silence. The cops held the line, neutrality tipping toward fairness as the evidence circulated. Shouts rose from the protesters, not rage but demand. Justice, closure, the moral weight of lives reclaimed. But in the midst of the swell, a shadow detached from the hospital's side entrance. A figure in a dark coat, slipping toward a waiting sedan, briefcase in hand, likely the contractor's rep, fleeing with digital backups. Ethan's eyes narrowed, instinct surging. "Caleb," he murmured, nodding toward the escape. The enforcer moved like a tide, two brothers peeling off to shadow the car without a word, loyalty's quiet machinery in motion. The director's phone buzzed incessantly, allies scattering as the story broke online, headlines blooming like wildflowers after rain. By midday, the lot pulsed with energy, the iron oath a pillar amid the storm they'd unleashed. Ethan retreated to his bike, the sun warming his leather, a faint smile ghosting his lips. Redemption wasn't a single act, it was this, the oath fulfilled in daylight, bonds tested and unbroken. The city watched, the corrupt empire fracturing, but the real victory lay in the faces around him. Lila's grateful nod, the guard's humbled stance, the brothers' steadfast gaze. Thunder rumbled afar, but for now, the road ahead gleamed with possibility, honor's legacy riding eternal. The midday sun climbed higher, baking the asphalt into a shimmering haze that distorted the edges of the parking lot like a fever dream. Ethan leaned against his Harley, the metal warm under his palms, absorbing the chaos unfolding around him without flinching. The crowd had thickened into a living tide, reporters jostling for angles, families from the old fire clutching faded photos like talismans, their faces etched with the quiet fury of long-denied grief. Lila stood nearby, her toddler balanced on her hip, the boy's small fingers twisting the hem of her shirt as he watched the world shift. The air hummed with voices, a cacophony of questions and accusations that drowned out the distant wail of sirens approaching like inevitable judgment. Elena wove through the throng, her voice cutting sharp as she grilled the director, the folder now clutched in her hands like a grenade. "These manifests don't lie, Mr. Harlan. Falsified bids, ignored safety reports. How many lives were worth your bonuses?" The director's face had drained to the color of hospital sheets, his tie askew, sweat tracing paths down his temples. He stammered denials, but the evidence spoke louder, pages fluttering in the breeze as Elena passed copies to her colleagues. Cameras clicked relentlessly, flashes popping like gunfire in the sun, capturing the unraveling. The cops, once poised for containment, now formed a loose cordon, their radios crackling with updates from higher-ups who sensed the tide turning. The lead officer shot Ethan a glance, respect mingled with caution, acknowledging the biker's role without words. Caleb's pursuit had vanished into the side streets, the fleeing sedan a silver streak swallowed by traffic. Ethan felt the pull, a taut wire in his gut, but he stayed rooted, trusting the enforcer's instincts honed on roads far rougher than these. The Iron Oath brothers held their ground, a ring of leather and steel encircling Lila and the gathering families, not as aggressors, but as sentinels. Noah knelt beside a young woman from the fire survivors, her eyes red-rimmed, listening as she poured out fragments of loss, her father's last shift, the smoke that stole him mid-breath. "We thought it was fate," she whispered, voice breaking on the words. But it was choices, their choices. Noah's nod was solemn, his grease-stained hands gentle on her shoulder, the club's quiet strength a balm against the institutional chill. From the hospital doors, more staff emerged, nurses in clusters, a doctor with a stethoscope dangling like a noose. Whispers turned to murmurs of solidarity, tales of pilfered supplies and pressured silences bubbling up like underground springs. The guard from the night before hovered at the periphery, his arms no longer crossed in defiance, but hanging limp, the weight of his error visible in the slump of his frame. He caught Ethan's eye across the lot, mouthing a silent, "Sorry," the gesture raw, human, a bridge from disdain to dawning respect. Ethan tipped his head once, forgiveness unspoken but extended, the oath's reach extending even to those who'd faltered. Sirens grew louder, not in threat, but reinforcement. State investigators, Elena had texted moments ago, summoned by the breaking story's viral spread. The director retreated inside, his entourage scattering like leaves in a gust. But it was too late. The web was torn open. Ethan mounted his bike, the saddle creaking under him, engine idling with a low, patient rumble. Lila approached, the toddler reaching out with a chubby hand to pat the handlebars, his laughter a bright note amid the tension. "You did it," she said, her voice steady now, laced with the steel Marcus had passed down. "For all of us." Ethan removed his sunglasses, grey eyes meeting hers, the lines around them softening in the light. "We all did. Promise kept." Caleb's bike roared back into the lot minutes later, dust kicking up in his wake, the sedan abandoned blocks away, its occupant zip-tied by a quick-thinking ally, evidence intact in Caleb's saddlebag. "Got the drive," he announced, dismounting with a grin that split his beard. "And a confession on tape." The contractor cracked like cheap chrome. Cheers rippled through the brothers, fists pumping in restrained triumph, the convoy's unity a force that bent the moment without breaking it. The investigators arrived then, badges flashing as they cordoned the director's office, questions flying like arrows. Elena's article hit the wires, headlines screaming exposure, hospital fire legacy, corruption unearthed by biker's oath. As the sun dipped toward afternoon, the crowd began to disperse. Justice's first wave receding but promising more. Families embraced, tears mingling with resolve, the air lighter now, scented with possibility rather than ash. Ethan lingered, watching Lila load her toddler into the truck, the engine's hum a farewell. She paused at the window. Pressing a small patch into his hand, Marcus's old club emblem, worn but cherished. "Ride safe, Ghost, your family." He pocketed it, the fabric a talisman against the roads ahead, oaths evolving but never ending. The convoy reformed under the waning light, engines awakening in a symphony that echoed off the hospital walls. They rode out, slowly, a procession of redemption, leaving Mercy General transformed, not just a building, but a reckoning point where shadows yielded to truth. Ethan led, wind whipping through his ranks, the city blurring into horizons of open blacktop. Scars remained, but they told stories of survival, loyalty's quiet roar, outlasting any flame. In the rear view, the hospital shrank, a chapter closed, but the ride, the promise, continued, binding the chosen in unbreakable chains. Back at the clubhouse that evening, twilight draped the lot in soft purples, fireflies winking like distant stars. The brothers gathered around a bonfire, flames crackling with the snap of dry wood, casting flickering glows on faces marked by the day's trials. Beers passed hand to hand, stories weaving through the smoke. Marcus's laugh remembered. The fire's heat retold not as tragedy, but triumph. Ethan sat apart slightly, the patch in his pocket a warm weight, his thoughts drifting to the endless road. Redemption wasn't erasure, it was carrying the load lighter, sharing the miles with those who'd earned the right. Lila called later, her voice warm over the line, the toddler's babble in the background. The board's suspended. Investigations starting tomorrow. Thank you for seeing us when no one else did. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, the night air cool on his skin. Just keeping my word. As the fire died to embers, the club settled into peace, the iron oath stronger, its legacy etched in acts that spoke louder than thunder. If these tales of grit and unbreakable bonds have touched your road, thank you for riding along. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more stories of honor and heart coming your way. Until the next horizon.